Perhaps more than gameplay, VR is about experiences, the feeling of being inside a different world. Asgard's Wrath then delivers you into a fantastical Nordic setting, and my time in it has certainly been an interesting one. The game is exclusive to Oculus Rift and can be found on the Oculus store through the link in the video description. Do take a look. This video itself is sponsored by Oculus, and all views here are entirely my own. So then, placed in the body of a Viking god, you find yourself with the ability to manipulate animals and transform them into followers capable of assisting you on your adventure. From a gameplay point of view, you regularly switch between the perspectives of a god to that of a mortal. As a god, you have the godlike view of the world, along with the capability of directly manipulating the environment by picking up objects or otherwise interacting with them. As a mortal, well, this is where the game gets especially interesting. Your godlike powers enable you to possess mortals, and as such, throughout the game you take control of a variety of individuals, plan out a part of their life. Each mortal forms a separate story arc or chapter. Now clearly, story is a massive part of this game, and as such I want to avoid too many spoilers. With this in mind, I'm going to focus on my experiences with the first chapter of the game, where you take control of the shield maiden Ingrid. This accounts for the first 4 to 5 hours of the game, depending on how you play, and beyond that, there remains huge volumes of the game to play, including new areas, worlds, characters, abilities, and much more. But as this isn't a full review of Asgard's Wrath, that goes beyond the scope of this video. Instead, I really want to talk about what it's like to play within the game world itself. For me, VR is all about the experience, and in my VR videos, I specifically like to talk about the perspectives these games offer. Washed up on the shore of a beach then, after suffering a shipwreck, Ingrid is in hot pursuit of the Norse god Tyr, the god of war. Seeking vengeance upon Tyr for what he did to her family, Ingrid implores the gods to assist her in her quest. And this is where you come in. Taking possession of Ingrid, you undertake this quest on her behalf. So with that background information out of the way and established, what is the experience itself like? Well, first up, the game itself is big. There's a huge amount to do within the game and a lot of different environments to explore and progress through. It's these environments which added a ton to the feeling of adventure I got from this game. Perhaps more than that though, Asgard's Wrath, for me at least, is about perspective. Now computer games, and more so VR, do something that no other medium can do. They put you in the shoes of someone, or at times even something else. Switching perspectives between god and mortal then is a powerful experience, and this will become more clear as the video progresses. But to explain the point a little, viewing the world from the perspective of a god, the world and its inhabitants become a plaything. The world is small, and the people are far smaller. It's all too easy to view the humans as insignificant, or worse yet, as toys. The game has a wonderful balance on how it conveys that perspective, but also enables gameplay from that perspective as well. Likewise, viewing the world from the perspective of a mortal is a dramatic shift. The world is large, at times dangerous, and when, on the rare occasions you encounter the gods, they are huge, overwhelming and terrifying. Asgard's Wrath then plays perfectly with your sense of perspective. The Asgard Hold, filled with the gods and many other elements from Nordic myth, is a great example of this. The place is full of life and full of detail. It essentially forms a home base for you, a central hub if you will. It's a place to store your items, to make upgrades and purchases, as well as to obtain quests. It's also one of the key places you will interact with the god Loki. The Asgard Hall isn't merely functional though, it somehow conveys a feeling of being a place that you're not only welcome in, but also a location that you want to visit time and time again. And a part of this comes down to the crazy levels of detail here. Another part of this comes down to the characters, and this brings me back to that point of perspective. This of course is greatly assisted by the sense of scale. Scale is important with VR. It's one of the primary factors in conveying a sense of presence, that feeling of physically being within the game world. Everything here has perfect scale. And my first encounter with the Orc Blacksmith, for example, was intimidating to say the least. The guy is huge. Another example of this great sense of scale comes early on in the game, where you gain the ability to take control of a mortal sailor whilst within the Great Hall. Of course, the gods of Asgard are truly huge, easily measuring hundreds of feet tall. Humans, by comparison, are tiny. The Great Hall is scaled for the gods, so as a human, everything is massively oversized. Running along the bar as a mouse-sized human is certainly quite the experience, and a real shift in perspective. All of this goes a long way to play with your sense of what it means to be human versus what it means to be a god within these Nordic realms. And this doesn't just come across in the environments, but also in the game's sense of character. Although, that said, undermining all of this, in some places at least, is the voice acting, which on occasion isn't all that great. Ingrid seems a bit overbaked, at least to me, and the fellow animal creatures also have camp cartoon-like voices.
Others may pray to you, dear, but they are worshipping evil. I will not let others suffer as I have. I will bring an end to your madness.
Yet, in other places, the voice acting is great. Loki, for example, really does shine. All said then, NPC characters really is an area where VR games still need to make massive strides in. Interacting with an NPC on a monitor is one thing. Interacting with NPCs in VR, on the other hand, always seems to highlight that the NPCs are just computer models. It's just an artifact of VR, and one that will likely be with us for a while yet. But even with these limitations, Asgard's Wrath's NPCs have a great sense of character. Combat in VR, meanwhile, is another aspect of gaming that is very different to that of a monitor. There's no keyboard or mouse here, or no gamepad. Instead, you have the weapons physically in your hands in the form of a touch controller. And as such, you have to use them in that exact way. Sword strikes, parries and shield blocks rank among these. And there are also many other uses as well. Now, I admit that I really suck at combat. In some cases, I'm passing decent with some games, but in other games, not so much. Now, Asgard's Wrath, for me at least, is one of the later. I'm not all that good with it when it comes to combat. Now, that's not to say that the combat isn't good, it's just that I'm not very good at it. That said, I still enjoy it. I'm not sure what the specific issue is for me here, I think, with combat, but, I think it's the lack of haptic or kinetic feedback. For example, firing a gun in VR feels very natural with the touch controllers and using the triggers. Holding a sword, meanwhile, is a little more awkward due to the lack of weight. Striking an object with the sword delivers no real feedback. To be clear, this isn't a problem with Asgard's Wrath itself. Instead, it remains a limitation with current VR technology. And as I said at the start of the video, my VR videos are all about discussing the experiences of the game world, and from that point of view, melee combat in VR really is a tough one. Again though, I want to emphasise that combat is not bad. Far from it, in fact. It's certainly a lot of fun, and there's a whole bunch of different things to manage and to think about. Regardless of current technological limitations then, there is certainly something to be said for physically getting involved in the combat, and Asgard's Wrath is among the better offerings on that out there for this. Combat is also an area where your transmuted animal followers will assist you. Now, the followers are of course a big part of Asgard's Wrath. They underpin many of the puzzles that you will find throughout the game, and each have different abilities. Obtaining the animal followers is great, and again it goes back to that shifting godlike perspective. Plucking these tiny animals from the ground or out of the air is both surreal and intriguing. It's something so unique that only VR has the ability to convey this. For me then, Asgard's Wrath is all about shifting perspectives. Seeing the beauty of a coastline or watching the world fall apart as a mortal is impressive. Witnessing the world as a plaything whilst in the form of a god can be a fun shifting point of view. And of course, the great Asgard Hall is a world unto its own, quite memorable in fact. So, bottom line, some VR games shift me into another world, whilst other VR games feel entirely lifeless. Bringing a VR game to life in a believable world, making it compelling and enjoyable is a tough challenge. Taking advantage of the unique capabilities that VR offers is even more difficult. Asgard's Wrath then delivers on these things extremely successfully, and it's a strong indication that VR games are really starting to come of age. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.